Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. Despite all the massive apartment buildings you see around the city, the majority of the rental marketplace is still serviced by mom and pop landlords. For parents out there, this is not where you have your kids pay you rent. As tempting as that may seem, no, mom and pop landlords are small-scale property owners who typically manage one or a few rental units as a personal investment, often handling operations themselves rather than through professional management. Now, for those who cannot afford an apartment building, there's nothing wrong with being a mom and pop investor. In fact, we encourage it, but there are services out there that will make your life easier. And today we are joined by Hart Togman, co-founder and CEO of Rent Panda. Hart is a rental expert and is on a mission to make mom and pop landlords more successful. We pick his brain on the rental market, how to avoid bad tenants, how to place good tenants, how to use the black box called Facebook Marketplace. I never thought I'd be saying this, but you should be using Facebook and you should play by Facebook's rules. We also chat the affordability crisis, doing hard stuff, AI, and the future of tenant placement. If you are already a landlord, go check out rentpanda.ca. They even have DIY tools that will make your life much easier. You can get in contact with Mark over at joyhill.ca, myself at goodstewards.ca. Remember, this show is not financial advice, but it is valuable for listening amusement purposes. In fact, the listening amusement was getting so good this time around that Mark unplugged my mic for the entire show. And now, Hart Togman.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. My name's Mark. I'm here with Brent.
Hey, Mark.
And we have a guest today. And our guest today is Hart Togman. He's the founder and CEO of Rent Panda. Yeah?
Titles change every day, it seems.
Okay. It's where the buck stops at Rent Panda.
Yeah.
And so Rent Panda is, how would you describe yourself? A property management company? A property?
So we like to call ourselves a rental services company.
Oh, okay.
But lots of people say, what is that? Ultimately, we provide services across the spectrum for small landlords and large landlords in Ontario right now. So anything from property management to tenant placement, software, paralegal services. We're launching some coaching and education, some consulting services. But the idea is support small landlords with whatever product or service they need.
Yeah. So I guess the idea is if somebody has a property, they don't want to manage it, give you the keys and you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, or for those that do want to manage it, but they're scared of placing the wrong tenant, we can just find tenants for them and they'll self-manage.
Yeah.
And even for those who are pure do-it-yourselfers, they want to manage and find their own tenants, they can use Rent Panda as a piece of software to help them do that just a little bit better, like other marketplaces.
Okay. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so, give us a quick history on Rent Panda.
For sure.
How long have you been in business? How long have you been doing, I don't know, we'll say the property management side of things?
Yeah. So it's a long story, but I won't tell the whole thing here. But essentially, 8 years ago, I started the business with my brother. He had moved up to Thunder Bay because I like to say he lost a coin flip with his now wife, but he was down in Vancouver, ended up in Thunder Bay, and had a less than ideal renting experience. I was working in advertising at the time in Toronto, and he called me up and said, this world of Thunder Bay renting is terrible. What's it like in Toronto? And this was in the age of viewit.ca was the pinnacle of everything. This was 2016. That was the only platform that people used. And on their website, I think it said, last updated 2003 or something like that. And so we just realized that there was clearly an opportunity there and that Canadian real estate services were quite archaic. And so we started to develop Rent Panda, and we actually started as a pure tech company. So we didn't want to do property management. We didn't want to do tenant placement. We wanted to be that, tech startup that saw that hockey stick curve and, made millions within a couple of years. So we built the software side first. And in building that software, frankly, we built Rent Panda wrong because we built what we thought people wanted, and we had experience of two. And ultimately, when we started to build out more and more software, we talked with more and more landlords, and we realized that they wanted different things. And so we started to build more and more digital tools for them.
Landlords at the time?
So we were actually tenants when we started. We quickly became landlords and did the typical house hack that everyone, or that we hope everyone would be doing, but that lots of people end up doing. But ultimately, we learned from our clientele And most small landlords in Ontario, they thought they wanted software. They had a problem, and we talked about this a little bit off air, but every landlord was trying to avoid unpaid rent and tenant caused damage. And that's what it all boiled down to. And so we said, let's build that piece of software. Let's solve these problems with more and more software. And eventually the landlords, when we spoke to them, just said, I actually don't want software. Just find my tenants. And so we said no for 2 years because we're not a property management company. We are a software company. And then when we weren't seeing the growth, we thought, well, we have to make money somehow. So let's just do tenant placement on the side. Let's make a little bit of cash, help support the prop tech. And then we started to do tenant placement and found that more and more people wanted tenant placement. And then, as that progressed, obviously you place tenants and then people come to you and say, well, can you now manage my tenants? And we said no for another year or so because we didn't want to be property managers. And then eventually we said yes to it. And then we built the vision of Rent Panda really being a holistic player to offer services across the board. So that started in 2016 in Thunder Bay alone. So we started in this tertiary market where things were very different than big Toronto. And as we expanded across the province, we found that, there were more Thunder Bay-like markets than Toronto-like markets. And lots of landlords were struggling to find the support that they needed. So we started to expand. We went down to Guelph, then Kitchener-Waterloo, then Cambridge, and then slowly across the province.
When you say landlords, these are individual people that just have one or two properties? That sort of small?
Yeah, for sure. And so small landlords for us is really anyone outside of the institutional landlord. Although now we do work with some institutional landlords, but the vision of the company is to really enable landlording. And we have a vision that everyone can be a landlord, which is very different than everyone should be a landlord. But ultimately, everyone can be a landlord. It's just the lack of the right products and services and tools and the cliche power team to be able to do it. And so we want to be able to provide that across the board for those small landlords. And thankfully it's proven to be positive. People are looking for that service from Thunder Bay to Niagara, from Windsor out to Ottawa. And we've got 22, 23 team members now. So we've got teams in each region to cover those regions. We do a lot digitally to make it more efficient. And ultimately, we're trying to grow and really service all of these small landlords across the province.
So what was your aversion to property management? Is that personal experience you did not want to get into? Mark's laughing. Property management.
Yeah. So if you talk to most property managers, it's a very difficult business. Ultimately, you're managing, especially with small landlords, you're managing what is usually their largest investment. And it's very emotional. And ultimately, coming from a world of client management beforehand, it's a high pressure environment where you're the middleman, right? The tenants don't necessarily like you. Your client, the landlord, doesn't necessarily like you. We were talking about beforehand, when you need to make a repair, from a property management perspective, you're making that repair to maintain an asset, to keep the tenants happy, which will then mitigate that fear of unpaid rent and tenant caused damage. Because when you don't get things done, tenants get angry and they stop paying rent and they cause more damage. But yet you're spending the money of these investors who think, sometimes if they were doing it, maybe they could do it differently. Or if they called around, they could get another quote and it would be $5 cheaper. And why haven't you done that? And so it's just a very contentious industry to be in. It's part of what we're trying to change. Is that I think, people see their real estate agent and their mortgage broker and their insurance broker as a positive light that guides them through the purchase experience, hopefully. And then the property managers are we always say, we're the ugly ducklings of the real estate industry, right? Exactly. Yeah.
But tenants are the only way that you make money, right?
And we say the tenants are your biggest stakeholders. So in the whole spectrum of stakeholders that are involved in the real estate investing sphere, your tenants are your most important. And when you speak to really, really seasoned investors who've done well self-managing and then parsing it out to property managers, sometimes they're charging under market rent to get those quality tenants. They're giving their tenants Christmas gifts. They're, spending when they don't necessarily have to, but they want to accelerate that relationship with tenants. If you have awesome tenants, your property is going to be in good shape the majority of the time. And I think a lot of new landlords forget that through the journey. They think it's this contentious war that we hear about in the media. And I blame the media a lot for propagating those stories of tenant versus landlord. And ultimately, like to really answer the question, property management is a business where you have to deal with two parties that don't want to interact, that have to interact. So like imagine going to the store and like buying a piece of gum and the guy behind the counter is like, I don't want you to buy this piece of gum. I hate you. Let me get every cent out of you. And you're like, I really don't want this gum, but I have to buy it. And like, it's just a weird relationship. That's what we're dealing with.
Enter Amazon.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Enter Rent Panda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Amazon of property management.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the brand behind us, like why we are a panda, is most property management companies out there, most real estate companies out there, it feels bank-like. It feels like RBC, like it's blue, it's straight, it's hard edges. We protect your asset. It's very formal. And Rent Panda was meant to be the warm and fuzzy feeling that you can get if things go right. And I always said, like, you can get expert advice without, getting it from your lawyer behind a desk in a stiff armchair, right? Like if you have a friend who's a lawyer, you take him out for coffee, you sit in a comfortable chair, you get the same advice. And so why can't property management or just real estate in general be a softer experience? And everything about the brand, and I'm a marketer by trade and my brain works in that way, but everything is rounded and soft, and we can still be an authority while being approachable. So that's what we're trying to do, at least.
I've done that on a personal level. Like I think I personify the panda. We got to talk, the panda. Like I'm like a big, dumb, clumsy bear.
Yeah.
Soft, round, soft.
Yeah. Well, I like to dig into it sometimes because like pandas you see videos of and they're clumsy and everyone wants to cuddle them, but they are bamboo eating machines, right? Like 98% of their day, they do one thing and one thing well, and that's eat bamboo. And so ultimately like that's us, right? We can be warm and fuzzy, but when it comes to business,
yeah, we
can drill down and just get stuff done.
Well, if you replace bamboo with pizza, I'm your panda. But yeah, interesting you say about clients. Like all my best clients have had property managers before,
right?
And they haven't done a good job, and they've been looking for someone else. Mm-hmm. And then all the most difficult clients are like the first-time investors, and you just got to work with them and try to explain like how it works. Yep. And we actually. If we spend $0, we're saying this before, right? If we spend $0 on your house in repairs over the year, that is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because if you have a house, you have to spend some money, and you got to work out that budget, but we got to spend something.
Yeah.
And it's not, don't get upset when I fix something in your house because it needed it, right? But, yeah, it's the joys of property management. So you mentioned you have a support group for property managers?
I do. Yeah. So
part of the warm and fuzzy.
So it wasn't. It kind of just happened. But as we started to grow and do more podcasts, be in more investor groups, most of our marketing, like we don't pay for Google ads anymore, Facebook ads anymore. I go out and my team goes out to events and to, meetups as small as 10 people or rockstar real estate events of, 1,000 people. But we want to be in those rooms, and other property managers are in those rooms, just like the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers. And I ended up being friends with lots of them and realizing that while we are in competition, we are all doing a very hard job. And ultimately, I think there's enough business for everyone in this market, and more people probably should be using property managers, especially we were also saying, money was a bit cheap the last few years. Lots of people bought properties. Lots of people don't know how to manage their properties. There's enough business for everyone. But ultimately, it's a tough business emotionally. Like we have budget for our property managers to go out and have drinks and have socials, and lots of our meetings are just venting, because when you're behind the phones and in front of tenants and in front of clients, like it really saps your emotional being. And so I thought, at the highest level with those business owners who are the property managers and managing the property managers, those people have no support systems.
For some reason, I'm just seeing like axe throwing or like rage rooms or something.
I actually so for our staff up in Thunder Bay, like they deal with lots of tough clientele. Yeah. And I went up there and I offered them like a few things to do as like the Christmas event. And I offered the rage room and I was like, please choose this one, please choose this one. And no one did. And we ended up doing like an escape room, which was fun. Okay. But I was like, how do you not want to just throw plates at a wall? And like, I was like, let's get the premium package with the TVs. Yeah. But it's tough and entrepreneurship is tough as well. Like as a business owner, you don't have anyone to vent to and you can't really vent down to the staff because then things start to crumble. And so
lonely place to be.
It's very lonely. Yeah. And so being able to collaborate with other business owners, and I just thought property managers can get together and like give each other a little hug and talk about market dynamics and trends and, you know, how to put out some information out there maybe that goes against what the standard media is saying that will help guide our clientele. Like, you know, CBC was saying rents were going up and up and up and up. And, you know, as an example, I was talking to property managers in Niagara. Niagara had been dropping rents for 3-4 months while Toronto was still going up. And now everything is shifting down. But these Toronto-based investors who were investing in Niagara were angry at all of our teams and all the property managers for being like, why are you saying rents should go down? I got, you know, $2,500 last year. I want $2,600 this year. It's not the case, but they saw the CBC articles. So I think that there's benefit to that support group beyond just obviously a nice warm hug.
Yeah. Get into that, the market trends. Like, what are you actually seeing right now? You guys, like, I always thought, you know, Rent Panda, your specialty is placing tenants. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's misplaced, but
no.
Like, you guys do a lot of tenant placement. What are you seeing on the rental market front?
Yeah. So it's not misplaced also because the progression of that business to do tenant placement first and then property management, a lot of people know us for tenant placement. And I'd say, you know, property management is easier when you place the right tenant. And so we still put a lot of emphasis on the tenant placement side. But then we do manage properties as well. From a market dynamics perspective, there's a lot going on right now. But I actually did a podcast yesterday where I said it's a lot of boring, which I think is kind of good. And so ultimately, the numbers that people, you know, want, or the topics that people want to hear about is rent, obviously, right? Or what's happening with rents. Ultimately, growth has slowed across the country. So if you look at the country, it's, I think, 2.7%.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Usually it's me.
Oh, okay. So 2.7% across the country. But then, you know, Alberta and...
So what do you mean 2.7 what?
2.7% growth in rent across all of last year.
All right.
But then when you look at Ontario and specific markets in Ontario, like Toronto dropped, I think it was 6.5% in rent. But ultimately, 2024 was rents were going down. The expectation for 2025, at least Q1 and Q2, is that rents will continue to go down because there is a heavy drop in supply, or a heavy drop of supply on the market. It was record numbers in purpose-built apartments, like 30-year highs of new inventory dropping on the market, which will then drop, obviously, purpose-built rental prices and then have that ripple effect towards the single-family homes, the duplexes.
I want to dig into that for a second. Like how does that, because we've argued a little bit about that too, right? So just, I don't know, generally apartments are like 1 or 2 bedrooms, right?
Generally, yeah.
So, I mean, have you seen, I'm curious about the correlation, right? Yeah. Have you seen a correlation between, like, we get it, purpose-built rentals, condos, right? Everybody's trying to get people in for cheap, but those are like, you know, what does Ron, the mortgage guy, call them? Dog crates in the sky. But, you know, how would that have an effect on like a nice 3-bedroom upper unit of a bungalow? Yeah.
So I always like to look at market dynamics like regionally first, because Canada numbers mean nothing. Ontario numbers kind of mean nothing. Yeah. You look at the specific market, and even if you're looking at Hamilton, obviously, you know, on the mountain versus off the mountain is very different. Then you go on the mountain and you get to specific pockets of neighborhoods that are going to be affected differently. So you really got to drill down, but ultimately at a little bit of a higher level, the 3-bedroom single family homes are still going to be affected by a drop in rates of those 1 and 2 bedrooms, because the biggest trend that I'm seeing is the affordability crisis.
Yeah.
And people like to talk a lot about the housing crisis. Why is there any vacancy when there's such a shortage of housing? And my opinion, and maybe a bit of an unpopular opinion amongst landlords and investors, is the affordability crisis for tenants far outweighs the housing crisis, because people will find ways to make things affordable. And we see the rise in non-traditional family units, as we call them, right?
Yeah.
Like young people who have graduated, they're not students, and they're living, with roommates a lot longer. There's families co-housing together because things are just unaffordable. And so when you look at, a family that would typically rent a 3-bedroom house, when things get unaffordable within that 3-bedroom house, all of a sudden they look at a 2-bedroom apartment, and they're going to cram a couple kids into a bedroom to make it work. Or they're starting to look at maybe a small 3-bedroom basement as opposed to the whole house, or the 3-bedroom upper of the bungalow versus having the extra space downstairs. And so the market has blended a little bit, where it's typical for an investor to look at their asset and, within a neighborhood, within an asset class, be like, okay, my comparables are 3-bedroom homes.
Yeah.
But they're not anymore. So you have to look at what a tenant is going to be thinking about. And the tenant may see a small 3-bedroom home in the same light as a large 2-bedroom apartment. And so the dynamics are shifting because of that huge affordability issue that's happening. And what we're really trying to do is open people's eyes to the spectrum of traditional comparables, because ultimately it's what can a tenant afford. And we like to profile tenants in a good way, like paint the picture of your ideal avatar of a tenant that is going to live in that property. And now if you really picture yourself as that avatar, put a name to them, give them jobs. Do they have a dog? Paint the picture of who they are, and then think about what they're actually going to be affording, what they're going to be willing to take in this market. And it's changed a lot from what it was before.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I really wanted to hit that point, because we have this picture in our head, and from years past, right? Of you got the 3-bedroom, who are you looking for? You're looking for a family, right? I don't want to cram more people in there.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of tenant profiles, so this is just me in our limited experience in sort of the Hamilton area. Is it just me, or does it seem like tenant quality is getting worse?
Yeah.
That's maybe not a nice way to put it. But.
No, it is. It's one of those trends that we report on, and we've actually partnered with Single Key, and we've got a larger subset of data because of that.
Okay.
And so we're looking at the quality of tenant applications as an average, and it has dramatically dropped. So from 2022 to 2023 to 2024, all of the numbers are going down. So average credit scores, they used to be in the high 600s. They're now in the mid 600s. The average number of collections, it doubled from 2022 to 2023, and then went up another 50% from 2023 to 2024. Bankruptcies doubled year over year. So as an example, I think the collections rate that we see in applications is close to 18% of all applications have some sort of collections on them.
Wow.
Which is a scary number when that was, 5 or 6% just a couple of years ago. So that's the affordability crisis, right? People are struggling to make payments. And so the quality of tenant has definitely dropped. Rent to income ratios have pushed dramatically. The age old 30% rule is no longer. We're closing in on 40%. Again, it's dependent on the market. If you look at Toronto, it's 50, 60%. People are spending way too much money on their housing because they just have to. And the scariest number is, because of that, the number of fraudulent applications is going through the roof. And so it was 2% in 2022. It was around 4% in 2023. Our latest number reporting on 2024 was close to 9% of all applications have fraudulent information. And there's been reports from Menkes and the big guys like that, and they were seeing 50% of all applications had fraudulent information. So it's scary because they're looking at Toronto apartments probably, and so when things become more dire, when things become more expensive, people aren't trying to be malicious, right? These aren't professional tenants trying to just dupe someone across the board. It's someone who's got a 620 credit score, just fudging that number to be a 660 and maybe removing the one collections for the Rogers bill that they couldn't pay a couple of months ago. So it's kind of a sad state that we see this happening. But what that leads to is lower quality tenants And us focusing on tenant quality when we're placing tenants means higher vacancy, right? Because landlords are going to sit waiting for that right tenant. And then that makes the job of property managers harder because now our average time to lease goes up and now investors are angry at us.
Yeah.
And so it's this vicious cycle that's happening. And so my other unpopular opinion is rents need to come down more, right? They need to drop for another quarter or two. And then the boring part is I hope they stay stagnant, right? They need to stay stagnant for a year or so for things to kind of catch up, right? And some inventory needs to get filled, right? Our vacancy rate needs to come down. And CMHC is still reporting, 1.8% as a vacancy number. Well, that's across their subset of purpose-built units that they can survey. When you get into the non-purpose-built market, we're seeing like 4, 5, 6% vacancy rates. And that's still just like what we can survey.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's much higher than that. So yeah, the numbers have been going down, and it's not to paint like a doom and gloom picture, but it's the reality of those conversations that we want to have as part of that, support groups to like educate other property managers to help push this message out to say, if you're an investor looking to purchase a property, you need to be more careful. You need to run your numbers with higher vacancy rates, with higher repair rates, just understanding that maybe, the AAA tenant, and I absolutely hate that term, the AAA tenant, because what is that? But that tenant doesn't really exist. Yeah, yeah, the tenant that just keeps going. But like, I didn't even mean to paint that picture, but like those tenants do keep going in that they're not moving. So the latest numbers that CMHC said, if you can trust them, is that there was 6% turnover in units last year. Like a healthy market should be well into the double digits, like 15 to 20% turnover at least. So 6% paints again a picture of grim. Yeah.
Like if somebody rented a unit in the last couple of years and you're saying rents are tracking down now, like you think there would be a higher turnover. We've had it a little bit in our portfolio. There's been a couple of units where people, like we have a unit vacant, and then we get an inquiry from one of our tenants on that unit, and they're like, hey, we're trying to save for a house. Can we go see this place? It might be like a few $100 cheaper. Yeah. So there's some movement there. Like that wouldn't be higher than 6%.
I mean, surprisingly not. And I think ultimately it's in relation to the tenant quality being lower because I think, yes, people are having trouble affording more. And so generally people's scores are lower and collections are higher. But I think it's also a subset of who's looking, because those tenants that are in places that they can't afford, maybe they've been there for a while, they're looking to save for a house, they're not moving, right? They're going to stick it out. They're going to put an extra kid in the bedroom with a bunk bed. They don't want to move unless they have to. And so that I think is leading to that drop in the turnover number. But the rents need to come down. That turnover number needs to come up. So yeah, it's a pretty unhealthy market right now. And my prediction for 2025 is at least that rents will continue to drop, stabilize, and hopefully maybe I'll come back in a year and talk about predictions for 2026. But I'm hoping that stabilization leads to a healthier market. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors at play, right? I was just looking at some numbers for interest rates and what the banks are predicting, and so they're predicting drops in the Bank of Canada rate, which in turn, and if you can believe that, and I have no reason not to believe it, I think they're going to continue to cut, not drastically, but we'll probably be looking at mortgage rates in the 3s by the end of the year. So, I mean, that in turn should lead to some more affordability. Like even just, I don't know if you track like house prices and house sales, but we look at that. I look at that. I think Brent does too. And, even just in the area, right? They're dramatically down. And there's deals out there, right? And so I guess, then hopefully people do the numbers and figure out like, okay, here's what I need to make. Here's my margin of error. So here's what I should charge. But that's probably not going to be like the peaks that we've seen.
Right.
But I mean, the tenants who have rented in the last 2 years, probably what we're seeing anyways, they are more likely to move now because rents are lower. But anybody who's been, 3-4 years in a place, rents are still higher
for sure
what they were back then. So they're, kind of mirrors what we're seeing anyways.
But part of it is thinking longer term. So you're talking about 2025, maybe 2026. But if an investor is making a commitment to buy a property and they're doing their due diligence, they're finding something like you mentioned before, getting cash flow, which may or may not be tricky, but if you zoom out over 10, 15 years, like real estate is a vehicle that, and if you build these relationships with tenants, right? Like you guys finding good tenants, if you can get a landlord who respects their property, invests in it adequately with repairs, and then, you know, they place a good tenant that you have a good relationship with, like it could be a huge vehicle. It's just like, I think when we focus on like the next month or the next year, it starts to get like, okay, is this even worth doing?
Right.
Like, or is now the right time, right? But then if you zoom out 15, 20 years, it's like, oh man, I should have done 100 of these.
Yeah. Well, to reverse the doom and gloom picture that I painted, you know, all of that is in the world of property management and the trends that we're seeing. You know, I'm still buying and looking to buy as a personal investor, because, you know, we see the small trends that are happening within specific regions, and there's still lots of opportunity. And the biggest opportunity that I think I presented on like 9 or 10 months ago was that this scary market has scared away others, right? And so when most people are scared away, and when there are deals out there, it's going to be a market where you can really find those deals if you're putting in the effort. So it's harder to, but when anything is hard, you know, anything hard is worth doing. that's the saying, or is that the saying?
Most things
hard.
Anything.
Yeah, but there are deals, and so, you know, we've got a renovation that started 2 days ago for a student rental up in Thunder Bay. You know, we got a JV deal for a 3-bedroom townhouse that still makes sense. And I think, you know, cash flow is great. This one's in Thunder Bay as well. Yeah. But we talked to investors who are doing good deals in Belleville. You know, there's still deals to be had in St. Catharines. Really everywhere, I'm sure there are still deals, but we're hearing of, you know, certain pockets of markets doing better than others. But I think ultimately it's about being just a little bit more conservative when you are approaching those, because money isn't as cheap. But if you've got the right team around you, you can find good deals, and you can still have lucrative investments, especially when you look out a decade. You know, most people, even in their long term is a couple of years. And you know, there's some really great investors out there and educators out there who are saying, you know, real estate should not be looked at in the first decade. Like if you can survive that decade, great, look 10, 20, 30 years out, and that's where you'll really benefit from it. And I think, you know, we're just going through a little bit of a tough time right now, but it will be worth it for sure.
Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, we tend to, as property managers, we're looking at like hyper local data and small bits of time. But yeah, it's good to kind of bring that picture back out for the long term, right? So, quick question, landlord tenant board. You guys,
that is not a quick question. We're going back
to doom and gloom. No, I mean, so typically we don't really, I can't remember last time we had to evict somebody, or that we had to go, to the landlord tenant board for an eviction, or for whatever. Like, how are you finding dealing with them? Has there been any improvements in the last year or so?
There's been a few improvements. I think people still really like to hate on the board, and I'm a little bit of one of them. But there's some interesting work that's being done. So the very cool thing is that there's now some landlord advocacy groups out there. Like Solo is out there pushing pure landlord advocacy. The Landlord Self-Help Center is one that's great. I'm a little bit biased because I sit on the board there. But they've been having open conversations with the landlord tenant board, and so has Solo, which you could never speak to someone at the board beforehand. You know, it was difficult to actually get answers. So there's some adjudicators, but like there's an administration behind it, and there's bureaucrats running the administration, and so you can actually speak to them, and they're starting to reveal data on, you know, average wait times, which there was no transparency beforehand. And they're being transparent about the new hires, what that's doing to the wait times. And so I think we're at the very early stages of transparency will lead to vast improvements. There's been slight improvements. So when you get into like, you know, N4 L1s, the time has been sped up a little bit. You know, it's not 8 to 9 month wait times. It's maybe 3 to 4 month wait times now. But if you're trying to evict someone with an N5 or, you know, others, N8s, it still is taking a long time. You're still at like 6 to 9 months to get someone out. But my reverse doom and gloom is that there is hope, and that ultimately we've seen a huge trend in data transparency over the last year and a half, and that's been from new companies like Open Room or even Single Key and others like that. But to see it from a government entity is really promising. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I don't want to paint the picture of it will just be great, but the fact that there was one webinar where the chair of the board of Solo was presenting with an investor group, and someone at the LTB heard about this meeting that was happening. It ended up being 150 people at this webinar, and preemptively the LTB bureaucrat sent their numbers to the chair of the board to be like, hey, we're trying, we're actively trying, and it at least means that they've heard the complaints, right? Things aren't falling on deaf ears anymore.
If you go on a hearing, the first thing they say is you're not allowed to record anything. But I always think in the back of my head, if somebody did record this, and that got out on the news or whatever,
so there's a little bit of a vigilante group on Facebook that attends hearings, and then communicates, again, an element of transparency, but they communicate on these Facebook groups what's happening at these hearings. But it is good in that it brings pseudo case law to the table almost immediately. Because one of the problems, and I think why Open Room or Landlord Easy or any of these reporting groups have popped up, is because Canly was unreliable. And when the data doesn't hit Canly forever, or it takes 6 months or 9 months to get there, it's too late. And so when you have that immediate transparency, it's helpful. And although they're not recording what's happening there, they're at least Communicating the judgments, or just the case law essentially that's coming out of it.
You talk about property managers being in that in-between spot and being hated by everybody.
Yeah.
Being at the landlord tenant board must be 10 times 10 times that, right?
I feel bad for some of them. I mean, they get on calls now that they're trying to communicate. They get on calls and they're like, we've doubled the workforce, and then everyone's just like, we hate you. It's not enough. And they've got shackles of some sort, that they can't just do anything. But wouldn't want to be.
Speaking of transparency, I've always thought Facebook Marketplace is a black box, and I don't know. You guys must use this as a tool to get tenants.
Yeah.
How do you have the keys to what goes on?
What are the secrets, Hart? We want them.
So I'll say I don't have the keys, but I'm the locksmith who's Jimmy's the lock, and then when you're not looking, you just whacks the handle and it goes through. I'll speak from my advertising brain for a second, in that Facebook is a giant black box, and ultimately,
but it's also the one that a lot of landlords, especially the small guys, gotta use.
Yes.
To get tenants.
So our latest number, it's good that we're talking now in January, because we've got all of our data from 2024. 75% of all closed deals for us, and that's tenants placed, came from Facebook.
Wow.
So it is the platform. 10%-ish from realtor.ca, and then the Kijijis, rentals.ca, Zumper, all of the other ones, they're all in the 1% to 3% range. Yeah. So Facebook is the behemoth. And Facebook doing that was actually the reason why we even started to think of removing ourselves as a platform. Rent Panda is a rental marketplace. Yeah. We don't say it is because tenants aren't there searching actively, aside from a couple small markets. Facebook is where tenants are. And it is the place that landlords hate searching for tenants the most. So the first thing I like to say to people, just from a mentality perspective, is a tenant who clicks that button, is it still available? The button that sends a shiver down your spine. That tenant is not a bad tenant. And people often, and especially new landlords, are like, well, I wrote in my ad that you have to provide this information, and then I'm not going to respond to is it still available messages. You are losing out on 70 of that 75% of potential closed deals. Facebook has trained human behavior to say that clicking one button is enough to inquire, right? And there's lots of memes and reels and whatnot about the world of Facebook Marketplace, whether you're selling a used tennis racket or a $5,000 rental house. So ultimately, you need to play by Facebook's rules, and that is tenant engagement comes from is it still available. The biggest piece of advice I will say is that landlords need to lose ego and realize that they need to think like tenants, and tenants do not read listing descriptions. You can have it there, but I like to paint the picture of a tenant, right? So we tenant profile as property managers. Let's imagine you've got a 3-bedroom main floor of a house on the Hamilton Mountain for rent, right? Who's going to rent that out? It's going to be a young couple who's got 1 kid and a dog. Well, let's get granular, right? They've got a Bernedoodle. Their kid is 2 years old, goes to daycare down the road. One of them works in Toronto. One of them works, fully remote. And you really paint that picture. Okay, that couple, they're going to commute home from Toronto. They're going to be working remote. The one at home picks the person up, the kid up from daycare, has to walk the dog. They're looking for their next rental listing at 9:30 at night when they are shattered. And as a father of a 1.5-year-old and soon to be 2 under 2, they are
3 in the morning.
Yeah, right. And they can't sleep. You pop on Facebook Marketplace at 3 in the morning. You're on your phone, so no one's looking on a computer, and you're just scrolling, right? And so, like, ego aside, no one is reading rental listings. And even when you look at that rental listing, the first image or your quality of photography or video now is going to stop someone. We used to talk about this in advertising as thumb stopping power, literally.
This is, sorry.
Yeah.
Just quickly. Yeah. So I teach an Airbnb class, and this is like verbatim the same thing. When you're doing an Airbnb listing. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's that first picture. If
but
you don't have that, nothing else matters.
Yeah. And on Airbnb, it's common knowledge that, you hire a professional photographer, you get beautiful imagery, you light the place, like it's all about the photography. And the reality is whether, again, you're selling, a new Silverado and your GM, or you've got a used tennis racket. And I used to flip furniture on Facebook Marketplace all the time.
Oh, we love talking about couch flipping here.
But photography did it. I used to buy couches, or not couches, but like dining room tables off of estate sales for $1, bring them home, put them in my dining room, take a picture, and sell them for $250 to $400. I could probably have sold them for more, but I didn't do anything to them other than take good photography. And so ultimately, when it comes to the rental listing, you got to remove yourself from landlord mind and put yourself in tenant brain and go, I'm just, this tenant at 3 o'clock in the morning, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And I see a picture that I like and I hit, is it still available? I'm not reading the description. The only time I may read that description is on that Sunday morning when I've got the kid in the back and the dog in the back, and I'm going out to 9 different showings. And I'm thinking, oh man, what is this place I'm going to go see now?
Yeah, what was it all?
And so now I'm opening up the description and being, okay, I'm walking into a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom.
Show up, or it doesn't have a hot tub.
So I think they don't show up because of many reasons. Lots of times I think it's scheduling. And so they'll say, I'm coming to these 17 different places, and they'll just forget. So as property managers, we have a scheduling tool that puts, a calendar invite in. It sends out automated reminders 3 days before, 2 days before, 1 day before. If they don't confirm within 2 hours of the showing, it automatically cancels the showing. So there's tools that you can put in place to limit the no-shows, but they still happen. And these days, there are upwards of 50% of all scheduled showings cancel or just don't show up. So, Facebook is this black box where number one is play to the behaviors that Facebook has taught. And then second is the algorithm, which I will say, if I come back in a year's time, it will be different than right now. Was different a year ago.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I always boil it down to engagement, right? Facebook is a social platform that wants engagement on the various things that are on its platform. Again, whether it's a car, a tennis racket, a post from your friend that they had a great night out, Facebook wants people to engage on content because it means they're going to spend more time on the platform. And that means they can then sell more advertising dollars to the advertisers who pay. So your listing is in of itself just an engagement tool. And so think about getting the most engagement possible and as quickly as possible, because when that listing hits, the algorithm is starting to process and saying, do people want to engage with this? So there's like little tips to send it out, and don't just post it on Marketplace, but post it on the localized groups within that region. Yeah. Those groups get a lot more engagement. They may get similar traffic to Marketplace, but more engagement. And even if that engagement is like, oh, you landlord monopoly man, I hate you, you're ruining this, that's still engagement. And so, send it out. Send it out to your friends, pay for advertising, right? So when you give Zuckerberg $5, over 5 days, you're spending $25. It's an investment that's worthwhile because you're telling the algorithm, I'm willing to pay for views. So it starts pumping views in. And that those views create engagement, and engagement breeds engagement, right? So when it's engaging, the algorithm sees that it's engaging and it gives it more engagement. And so that cycle really has to happen quickly and efficiently. And the other thing is responses. And so it's one of the value adds that I think property managers and even leasing agents provide is when people message you, if you wait a day, 2 days, if you're busy during the week and you get back to all your messages on Saturday, Facebook sees that, right? People have tried to engage with you and you haven't engaged for a long time. And one sneaky thing that they did is, if you remember back to Marketplace 5 or 6 years ago, it would say average response time of this seller. And you have a seller profile as a person posting on Marketplace. They removed that. You can bet that they're still tracking that, right? And so those with quicker response times get pushed up in the algorithm. So there's no like first page of results like Kijiji is, but you really, really need to think about what Facebook wants and give that to them so that they will reward you with engagement.
Yeah, so if you post something, you do all the right stuff, you post it to groups, you get a ton of engagement as quickly as possible, you start getting messages. I'm assuming some of these messages are going to be spam, or like not spam, but like just whatever. Yeah. Like you would never rent to those people, I don't know.
Yeah, so when you get those messages, I would say allocate 50 to 60% of them as, they're never going to respond back. Yeah. Right. So
would you advise them, okay, click on the message, respond right away, so your response ratio goes up and you're
100%.
With the other.
Do you do you copy and paste?
Yeah. So is
that bad?
No, not bad at all. Okay. So there's a spectrum of professionalism that you can apply to it. And so what you can do is you can go on Messenger, because it's usually faster, and you can respond back and write a message. You can copy and paste messages and still engage with people. And we like to engage with a first message that prompts engagement back, not a first message that's like, hey, thanks for inquiring, go fill out this form. Because again, engagement breeds engagement. So an extra message is engagement. So you can copy and paste. Then if you're on Messenger and on your phone, you can actually program your phone with like the accessibility features to have shorthands. So on your phone, if you put in, as an example, like .it is or .it or any short form that you want, you can pre-populate a message. So really? You can speed that up. Yeah.
Oh.
And so it's meant as an accessibility feature so that if you can't type out a long sentence, you could type like A. Sometimes it can get annoying because if it's something that you casually write, it'll pre-populate that message.
Don't do the.
Exactly, yeah. So in my phone, it used to be .it is because someone says, is it still available? And I would say .it is. And that would populate like a big long message. And then I would have the response. So when they responded to it with answers, I would put, .schedule. And then that would send them out the scheduling message. Then we go on to like the further version where on Messenger, you can actually bulk respond now. And this is a feature that we at least discovered about a year ago on Facebook.
Really?
So within the seller profile, they buried it quite deep. But you can go into your seller dashboard and then into your individual listings, and you can respond to all of those listings at the same time. It helps in the initial stage because if you've just listed and you've got 50 messages in the first day, you can respond to all of them with the same message.
Yeah.
And Facebook doesn't seem to detract it. And I say all of this is like we're still figuring this all out. There's no right answer.
Yeah.
You never will figure it out.
Yeah. And then, so that's like as professional as most people could get.
Yeah.
We've gone the slightly scary route where we've actually partnered with a company called Leasy. And they run a lot of the leasing software, so scheduling tools and things like that. And we've developed a Facebook bot. And so that Facebook bot will actually respond to all of the messages instantaneously.
But you have to use individual profiles, right?
Yes.
But the bot has access to the profiles?
Yeah. So
you don't have to give all your secrets away.
No. So the bot, Facebook, it's interesting because the long story short is Facebook actually piloted a rental listings program for brands about 4 years ago. It was out of the States and they pushed it into Canada. I think rentals.ca was part of that. We spoke to the guy who was running the program in San Francisco. And they essentially said they killed the program in Canada because it wasn't worth their time. So it does still exist in the States, and you can post as a business.
Yeah.
And they give you auto response functionality, which makes sense, right? Like any other business, and even in Canada, a regular business page, you can post something. And then when someone inquires, it's like, hey, yeah, thanks for inquiring. I can sell you this bowl. Go to my website. And it's business transaction. They don't allow that with rental listings in Canada anymore. So what we did was the bot essentially stays on an open computer. So it acts like a human being. It doesn't just run in the background. It actually utilizes a computer, and you can watch it. Like, it'll click on each box and populate the information. And so it's a relatively rudimentary like bot. It's not AI based or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's just sending canned messages based on codes that are in the listing description. So it actually reads the listing description and then punches out the message that's relevant to that listing. So we can have 30 listings and it'll actually respond to them individually.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could see AI, I could see that very shortly,
Yeah.
like taking over a lot of this
100%.
stuff.
I think in 2 years' time, Facebook will have evolved their marketplace to allow a lot more of this engagement. And if I were them, I would probably just design the bots myself, like as Facebook, and start selling them to industry.
Yeah.
Which is probably what they're doing in the States. And then they will hopefully bring it to Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting, because we
have a state, so
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
no, again, a lot of what you're describing is like just from our sort of short-term rental experience. It's all the same stuff, right? We use all automated messaging. A lot of the platforms that you can use to manage your listings are introducing AI now.
Yeah.
And some of them, like, it's just part of it. Some it's a value add, but yeah, eventually it's all going to be
Yeah.
AI. But I imagine consumers will have the same thing. So it's just going to be AI talking to AI.
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, you still have to show up at the listing, I guess, you know? Although I did see
just thinking that
CES.
Facebook is going to predict, like, your tenant is going to be this person. You might as well just sign the lease. Here it is. It's already with the signature. You just DocuSign.
Yeah.
it's, sorry, I was just looking at the latest Consumer Expo show or Consumer Electronics show. I don't know if you guys are into that.
Yeah, CES.
But all the robots they had out there, right? And they got some pretty, like, there's still work to be done, but pretty lifelike robots out there, right? They're promoting them as companions, but I could see they'd be like, okay, you buy this robot and it's going to go buy your groceries, or maybe not that, but it'll go to the listing for you.
Yeah.
Okay, just a question about AI in general. Like, I don't know if you've thought about this in the rental market, property management. Like, do you see it changing things in the future?
For sure. So it already has started to change things, especially on the institutional level. I mean, you see it down in the States again, and everything in the States ends up trickling into Canada at some point.
Yeah.
But there's the DOJ is inquiring into RealPage or one of those in terms of like price fixing. Right? So there's a company that's providing AI-based tools to price properties, and the claim is that it's essentially collusion.
Yeah.
And so the power of these tools has developed so quickly that it has to start influencing things on a day-to-day basis quite soon. That same case is being brought forward in Canada just slowly, and it probably won't progress, but it's still there. So pricing a property, for sure. There's going to be much more data transparency and much better, at least algorithms or AI-based tools that will predict rents and price your property. Again, very similar to the short-term rental market, right? On Airbnb, you can say, just price my property, and it's dynamic pricing, and Airbnb will do it for you. And so the one failure of the Canadian rental marketplace is that it's quite fragmented. And so Airbnb has a duopoly, at least. The Airbnb and VRBO are probably 98% of the market there. But when you get into Canada with long-term rentals, there's so many marketplaces, and they're all trying to hold their own data. And so the transparency there is a bit off. But I think the pricing will definitely get there. We already use some basic AI tools, like responding to messages. That will get more advanced. I think also posting listings and being able to evaluate tenants at a very cursory level. We envisioned a tool that would pre-screen tenants before they come through fully automatically. And there's already tools and logic, like just basic routing logic that you can build in. But when you start to layer AI onto that, one, it could be ethically dangerous, but I think someone will go there and push something through that does kind of change the fabric of how we how we evaluate tenants. And in the same way, I think it will make things easier on the tenant side, right? Being a tenant and searching for a property, you should be able to just get listings that properly address your needs. You should be able to put together a profile and an application without having to pull credit 4 times across 4 different landlords and different applications. And so I think that the unification of the industry needs to happen a little bit. That's what our original vision for Rent Panda was. It was like the platform that did it all. We moved out of that. Hopefully someone else will do it. But I think when that happens, coupled with the tech behind it, that will really change.
What you're saying, like a marketplace, like Facebook Marketplace, I think we know just sends you stuff that's relevant to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have to put your information in as a tenant and say, I can afford this, and then it only shows you whatever you want, it's like, well, what if I actually want a really fancy unit?
Right.
It's not showing me that. Well, I have to falsify this. Like, that's a weird Wild West that we could be going.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the very typical case of if a piece of technology is evaluating tenants and it knows that, this 3-bedroom house is typically going to, be rented to this demographic or this profile, then you get into racial profiling and segmentation of the rental industry that creates disparity, and it's a little bit scary and morally ambiguous at this point. And it's got to be done very, very carefully if it is done. But we always say on our end, it's like trust but verify. And so you can have AI doing some of the initial groundwork that is labor intensive to do, but decisions need to be made, at least right now, with people.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Can you ever replace that? Because, like, we go through all this stuff with the showing, but when you're at the showing and somebody walks in, most of the time, right away, like yes or no.
Yeah.
And there's no, maybe there's some preconceived ideas, but there's nothing like that face-to-face meeting and some intuition.
Yeah.
And like, if you're your first time renting out an apartment, you probably won't have that. But if you've done it a bunch, you just you see them pull up. And and you see them walk up and you say hello. And like most of the time for me, I've already made my decision. Like, okay, we'll talk more, or like, no, I'll show them the place, but they're not getting it.
Right.
And
so my counter to that, I don't disagree. I do agree. But the shred of what we've seen is, as a property manager that's tried to push out that type of intuition in a process, because we've got markets all over Ontario. We've got people all over Ontario. I tried to say, how do I teach that as someone who's done thousands of showings? How do you teach that to someone who's first day on the job? Yeah. And ultimately, if you're teaching someone, and we've been able to do it, right? We call them like qualitative metrics at showings. Did someone arrive on time? We leave them instructions in the showing scheduling tool so that they should park on the street, not the driveway, right? Did they park on the street or did they park in the driveway? Check mark X. And so there's like a whole slew of these factors. Did they take off their shoes when they come in unprompted? So you can quantify it in some way, even though they're qualitative metrics.
Is the rep just standing there with a checklist?
Yeah. And we have like a rating scale and we have a note section. And so when you think about training someone who's first day on the job, you're trying to replicate the experience of someone who's been doing it for 20 years. You can see how you could theoretically train a model to do the same thing. And then we've even envisioned stuff, not that we're going to do it, but, in the pondering, in the shower, on a Friday night, I'm just like, well, why can't we have digital locks on the doors, and you pre-screen someone before they come through the door? And then, for showings, instead of having someone on the ground, we spend money on the infrastructure and we outfit the house with cameras all around, and an AI model can evaluate their behavior while they go through for a showing and note these elements of the qualitative that we would normally analyze on site. And why can't you have a tablet on the kitchen counter, and at the end of their showing they stand in front of the tablet and they have a conversation with an AI bot and they answer a few questions and you record a video? Like,
wowie zowie.
If you start to get into it,
6 months away from that, or
you could do that all now.
So you could, and I always say, like, the short-term rental industry is a great example of it, where if you look to other markets, there's like people have done fully virtual showings, and there's companies in the UK and Australia and other markets where it does happen. I just think Canada is in its infancy in terms of the rental industry and the real estate industry in general. And we're always just on the heels of the US, but like 10 years on the heels of the US. And even the US it's very driven by like bottom line profitability versus pure innovation within the space. And if you looked at some other markets across the globe, you see some really cool innovation. And I'd like to take credit for that camera idea and the virtual showings, but another company has done it. Like there's a company that will outfit a house fully with cameras to be able to conduct virtual showings and open houses even.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking like these are interesting ideas, but you guys might be able to utilize them, or another property management company who's doing this for a living. But if it's just the average investor, they own 1 or 2 properties, they have a couple units, like they get a vacancy, they're not going to go and like they might know you and you're doing that for a living. But like for those people's perspective, there still has to be a tool for them to lease up their own place. Or do you just see it being like all the leasing activity goes to these property management companies, it's efficient? And
so I don't see that happening, because there's always going to be a market for the do-it-yourselfer of some sort. And I think that's good in that a lot of people learn by doing, and you should rent out 1 or 2 properties on your own, or at least, learn about it and then watch your property manager do it and be there at every step of the journey. And maybe not there in person, but talk to them and hire a property manager who's willing to take you through that journey. But ultimately, I think that there's going to be the do-it-yourself world, but there's also going to be a world where you're not going to do your own car work, right? Like some people in their driveway, they'll do an oil change. The percentage of the population that's doing their own oil changes even is pretty darn small, versus the percentage of the landlord population that's doing their own tenant placement. And so I think we are going to drift into a world where more people utilize professional service to run their investment properties.
I think we're going to see the news where one landlord goes to try out his own AI and doesn't get accepted for his own unit.
Right. Yeah.
I was thinking about how you're talking about all the how to do the quantitative measurement of the qualitative.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, I would fail. I would not read the stuff. I would park halfway on the sidewalk or in the wrong driveway.
Yep.
I wouldn't take off no, all this stuff's great, Hart, but I would never be able to rent from you.
but I would say, like, I put on my advertising brain, and we used to like design websites, and I would say, like, if a good quality tenant didn't follow the instructions, then something was wrong with the instructions, right? It's the user experience, it's how things are set up. And I think like UX and UI in this world of site design or app design or experience design is so incredibly important. And it usually starts off pretty bad, right? Like the notes on where to park are going to be buried somewhere. No one's going to read them, but it's our responsibility as the professionals in the industry to make sure that we're making it easy for tenants and landlords, because we're not trying to push everyone away. And a lot of people, I give another talk about like finding the right tenants. And so many people think about finding the right tenants in a way that they're just trying to push out all the bad tenants, right? They're trying to avoid those that they don't want versus finding those that they do want. And you see that in the ads, right? It's like no smoking, no pets, no kids, no students.
I like those because I'm like, thank you. You take all the people that I don't want, and I'm happy with that.
And so that's where really it's about attracting those that you do want and building the systems that will attract them, make it easy for them, make the process seamless. And then they think, wow, this is the most amazing landlord or property manager. I want to rent from them. And I think that the industry just has a lot of development yet to come.
Well, that it makes setting that initial tone, even if it's not like a AAA tenant or whatever, because we've had a lot of takeovers as well, where there's like bad relations. Yeah. But like we get to know them, we show them some grace, and you know what? They almost all turn out to be good tenants who pay on time. And if they weren't paying on time, they start to pay on time because there's some respect. And I think for most people, that's all they want, just a little bit of respect. Yeah. And anyways. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned kids briefly, and I was just talking to my kids about AI and like... Yeah, so I go down on this rant often on the podcast, right? Like my poor kids, right? So they at home, the oldest one is 10, and then they're like 8, 7, and 4. So, we get into these conversations, And like, oh, you poor guys. But I'm trying to prepare them, right? And I just want to know like your thoughts on like, what are you doing to kind of prep kids for the future? Because like I told them, look, kids, the reason we want, like, you don't get to watch TV except for maybe one day a week, and that you read, there's lots of books, you have to do piano, you got to do this and that. Like, we're trying to prepare you for this new world.
Yeah.
Because like my one son was asking me, he's like, so how often do inventions happen? And then so we got into the fourth turning, and I'm talking about like, you know, how, you know, there's cycles of time, and we're entering into this sort of fourth turning now.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of technological advancement, right? And, you know, they're kind of like counting spots on the ceiling, right?
Yeah.
But no, I'm like just talking about AI. I'm like, you don't need to know stuff. Like, you should know things.
Yeah.
Right? My one son, like, he'll just read an encyclopedia.
Right.
I'm like, okay, that's really cool. But you have to be able to like take all the information at your fingertips and use it wisely. And that's why you want to like develop your brain. So I don't know if you have thoughts about like, what are you thinking with your kids?
I mean, I've got a pretty radical thought process on that front, in that not that it's radical, but it's just old school. Yeah. So like I'm very much an advocate. Yeah, it is. I'm very much an advocate for like doing things with your hands. I mean, if you talk to my wife, I'm bringing up buying a farm and like having our kids raised around animals, because I think that that's like fundamentally something that humans are meant to do.
If you have enough kids, it's the same thing.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Well, where do you get that mentality from? Like, did you live in Toronto?
Yeah.
Did you grow up on a farm? Or?
No. So like, for my parents, like camping is like staying at the 2-star hotel versus the 3-star hotel. Like my dad, we never went camping. Like, they put me in scouts, and like they gave us that education, but like they said, go get it. Like, we don't want to be involved in that. But I think it was we were raised properly with good family values, with good work ethic and things like that. But ultimately, it was an interesting journey when I was in my late teens, where I started to talk to my grandparents and realize that we actually came from this world of before World War II, where like they were all working with their hands. And so my grandfather on my mother's side was a carpenter. Ended up. So like all my grandparents survived the Holocaust. He left right before the war. His wife survived in the forest. My other set of grandparents were in concentration camps. He was a carpenter. And my biggest regret ever was like, I didn't learn carpentry from him. We would like play in the garage. But before he passed, like they sold all these like big cabinetry. Like he owned a big shop, and then brought it to his house when he retired. I didn't get any of that, but I think like it's in my blood. Like I just like, watch my words, feeling like wood. Like I like wood.
I and just know like exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and just like the tactile world out there. And yeah, I think it was in my blood probably beforehand. I loved farming. I grew hops at my in-laws' cottage, and then found out on my dad's side, his great-grandfather was actually a hop farmer that produced the hops for like one of the biggest German breweries in like the 1890s or whatever it ended up being. Yeah. But then the next generation, it was, you be a professional, you make money, you support your family, because they all came to the country with nothing.
Yeah.
But I think it's all there. And I think I just have the mentality where I walk around the streets and like, what they call it, like raw dogging or whatever. But like, I'll sit on a plane and like not do anything, right? Like I'll just like sit there and like play with the map like a psycho, or like I'll walk to the subway and not be listening. Yeah.
Nothing. I don't get it.
I'm like not on my phone and this and that. And so, yeah.
Isn't that awkward? You get on the plane, you don't take out your phone, you look at the guy next to you, he's probably like,
yeah.
What is wrong?
And like human interaction. And, when my wife and I had our first, it was like, yeah, we're not going to find out what we're having. We were like, oh, why is that like a religious belief? And like, we're Jewish. Well, I'm like, no, like I think, and I kind of like, backlash. And I was like, I think it's a fundamental human experience that like you should not know the sex of your child beforehand. And like up until 50 years ago, probably 30 years ago, humans never knew. So like, yeah, you pull that baby out and find out, and you're like, amazing, great. And there's just like fundamental human experiences that I think we're missing out. And part of those are like, my son like crawls around in the backyard and like gets his hands dirty and shoves dirt in his face and picks up worms, and like those things should happen, I think, fundamentally in this world. And so like for me, I'm like, yeah, like take care of a sheep when you're 4 years old. Like that you should experience. And fine, we may not end up on a farm.
Castrating a sheep or something.
Yeah. Well, there's my other crazy belief, but like I think people who eat meat should not only like see the processing of meat, but like pick up a knife and try and slaughter a chicken if you're willing to go to the grocery store. And for every day of your life, you're 80, 90 years on this world, you're going to be eating chicken. You should know what actually goes into that. And like people call me legitimately crazy, and now I'm putting this out there in the world. But like usually I just talk about this with my friends, but like we went to see a friend in Newfoundland and they had chickens, and we were talking, and he's like, yeah, we have one chicken that's like cannibalizing all of the eggs of the other chickens. They've stopped laying. Like we have to dispose of this chicken. And I was like, can I help? And he's like, are you serious? I was like, yeah, I think I haven't done that. I'm an advocate for this thing to happen, and like this is an experience where I can do it. He's like, yeah. And like we took the chicken and went out back and slaughtered the chicken humanely and whatever. But I was like, I'm very happy I had this fundamental human experience now, because I feel better about eating meat when I know if I need to eat meat, I have to be able to slaughter a live animal to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I told you, pretty radical beliefs. But yeah.
I don't know. Is it? I mean, maybe it is to say it, but like I 100% agree. We've with our kids, I've made sure like when we're eating chicken or we're eating pork, they know where that came from. Yeah. Because so many people are like, they're fine to maybe eat meat or whatever, but they couldn't ever bear the thought of what actually goes into it. It's like, no, this is, if you want to eat chicken.
I'm like, I don't even want to know.
Well, okay, that I'll give you that one, because that's just like, the shovel off of the shop floor.
Yeah.
They should make people make that.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's just quickly, I want to give a shout out to Exotic Woods in Burlington. Cool. I don't know if you've ever been there, but they
I haven't.
You should go there because they have all kinds of different. I was just there the other day. I brought my 4-year-old.
Oh, awesome!
And we literally walked through and we just touched all different kinds of, like every kind of wood you can think of. They have it in all different forms.
Shed in Smithville.
Oh, is that the same thing?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, there you go. So
I've got like a sawmill guy down in Etobicoke.
Yeah.
And it's, you go out there and he takes down trees from Toronto and cuts them up. And literally like Sunday afternoon activity is like, let's go out to the sawmill. Look at that maple.
When you were saying that, there's something about just like you feel the grain, the different textures, if I stain it, what's it going to look like? Like, it's something.
Well, I'm curious, like, does this mindset just come up naturally, or like are you reading books or listening to different
Are you naturally nuts, or is that just
no, fully naturally nuts?
What kind of resources can you direct people to? I don't know. When you said that, I'm thinking of Ben Sass has a book, The Vanishing American Adult.
Okay, no, I haven't.
Yeah, it talks about just like, we haven't, like we've raised a generation of people who haven't matured.
Yeah.
And then part of that is to like, he makes one comment that's like, every person should ask their grandparents, like, to give them stories of their youth. Or like, basically the question is, like, go ask your grandparent, what was the hardest job you had or the first job you had?
Yeah.
And it's like usually, well, at 5 years old, I was like, slapping this and doing that, right?
Yep.
And it's just eye-opening to see, but our culture's kind of lost touch with that.
Yeah. To answer the question and then go in a roundabout tangent, but I haven't found any resources on that front, and maybe it's just like I haven't really looked for them. A lot of what I've been reading over the last couple of years is personal development, and I think moving down that road of personal development allows me to have the confidence to say my opinions out loud and start those conversations, and even being amongst groups where you're talking about typically hard conversations. Like I like the world of real estate investing because people will talk about money openly. But we had a friend the other day talk about their retirement. They're in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're talking about like what is a comfortable retirement number. And they were kind of speaking in hushed tones, and it's like, is 2 million okay, or should we push for 3? And like, what do you find? And no one talks about that because it's so taboo. And I think I've been going down this world of personal development and openness and doing hard things, and that's that's the world of books that I'm reading. But if there are resources out there to be like connect with nature, but I found that just surrounding yourselves with people who have similar mindsets. And so I saw a presentation from a real estate investor turned farmer, and he sold a bunch of investments up in Thunder Bay, bought a farm, Cold Springs Organics, out east of Toronto near Coburg. And he bought this farm, and I think his third or fourth kid was born, and he was just like, what am I doing? He was an engineer by trade, I think. And he wanted to provide something to the world, and he wanted to give back. And so he started this permaculture based farm, and he was like, I want to feed my kids and my community healthy food. And so I heard his talk, and so I just went up to him, and this is like the world of personal development, I think, let me do this. And I went up to him and I was like, I would like that experience. Can I come out and farm with you? And so I took a Friday off, and my team was like, where are you going? I'm like, to a farm. I'm like, to do what? To like, I don't know, like pick squash, like just get my hands dirty. And when I went out there, he was just like, oh, like, what do you want to do? And I was like, whatever your farm hands are doing, like, I would just like to do that. And so I think it's just about like seeing those opportunities and taking those dives in to do that is more so what I've been going down the path of. And then I also watch like tiny house videos all the time online, and just the aspirational side of like getting out of the rat race.
Did having kids change your viewpoint on things?
Yeah. A lot of my focus beforehand was building the business to build something cool to help a lot of people. And I think having kids, it made me a bit more selfish in the way. And I think also I'll say as a side note, like being selfish, I think sometimes is the most selfless thing that you can do, because by allowing yourself the time to work out. Like I work out so that I can feel good, so that I can be a strong and healthy dad. Like my vision is when my kid is 18, I can still like physically dominate him in a wrestling match, right? But by doing that, I feel better. I provide, better food for my family. I provide those outdoor experiences for my family. Because if I need to go on a 5-mile ruck, I'm putting the kid on my back and I'm going for a 5-mile ruck. And so I think having kids, it made me more selfless by being more selfish and saying I need to develop myself in order to be there for them. And very transparently and maybe a bit vulnerable, but I was on this path of self-destruction for the business. And I wasn't working out, I wasn't eating healthy. It was the heaviest I'd ever been, felt the worst I'd ever been. I was drinking to like just end the day. It was like, today was terrible, here's the bourbon. And like eating whatever was around. And I had this realization that I had this kid, now I need to do something different. So like the business is there to provide for others and to support. And I love building a business that can allow others to live their dream too. And we will hopefully get there. But ultimately having a kid and now two really points the picture back at like me and our family unit needs to be strong in order to then reach out to the next layer of community and society.
Yeah. I mean, that's
shock to, oh, now I'm responsible, or now I have to be responsible.
Yeah.
Well, and it's amazing when you look at that, right? Like, okay, so you build your own family unit and maybe that's selfish, right? You're doing the best you can but like, imagine if everybody had the same mentality and everybody built a strong family unit. What would our society look like when you're not living for yourself? You have to live for not doing everything for everyone, but for your kids.
I would translate that more to stewardship, right? Which is what the podcast is about. Like, it's you realizing, okay, like you have a body and you have health and you have time on this earth, and like you have to actually use that well, like steward it, right? It's not yours, it's given to you. And then like you kind of say, I can just be selfish first. Like, you have to, it's like the production capability, right? You can produce, but if you're not like doing your oil change or sharpening your saw or, working on your own intellect or whatever, you're not gonna be able to give to your kid or your wife or whatever.
100%. And I think, sitting around the table with real estate investors who are much, much, much more successful than I was, like I got invited to a mastermind group, 6 guys. And I was like, why are you inviting me here? Like at the time I had like one basement unit in my primary house. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And they said, you add value to the group, you run this company, we like your mentality, come to the group. And I was like, okay, sure. And you sit around this table and, it's a real estate mastermind. And within 20 minutes of the conversation, it turns into life and relationships and health. And all of these guys have built up these empires of portfolios and businesses and a community around them. And they all go back to, I want to work out more. I want to eat healthy. I want to travel. I want to spend time with my family. And it, as like the youngster in the group, it just paints that picture of like, okay, I have the opportunity now to start right. And like 8 years in business is nothing on the scale of things. So I have the opportunity to start it right and not burn myself out, sacrifice my health and hopefully lead a better life in that front. And, I saw my dad work his butt off for his entire life. Like he retired probably 10 years past where he should have and was so burnt out. And he's finally like a year into retirement. And I always said it's going to take him 3 years of doing nothing to decompress from even the last decade of work.
Yeah.
But it's like he put everything out there for us, and both my parents did. It's like, how can I do it differently? And not that they did it wrong; they did what they had to do. But how can I do it differently so that I can, build a life while living the life? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's probably a good spot to wrap things up. Thanks so much for coming on, Hart.
Thank you, guys.
Where can people, they probably, I don't know, do you post on social media? You drop nuggets of wisdom?
We're going to start to.
Okay.
So we do a little bit of a podcast that's going to be starting to release, but it's all through Rent Panda.
Yeah.
So if you go on rentpanda.ca, if you go on Rent Panda on Instagram, on Facebook, I like to say I am Rent Panda. Like I've got my Rent Panda shirt on, but I have a Rent Panda shirt on under my Rent Panda shirt. And I've got I've been joking that I've got the tattoo.
Rent Panda on the
not yet,
the loom?
Not yet, but I should. But yeah, everything that I'm going to be doing is through Rent Panda.
Yeah.
And I think it's coupling the business with the life and entrepreneurship and trying to help out. So yeah, they can just find us at Rent Panda anywhere that we are.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been great, Hart. Thanks so much. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.